Well, I was sent the book by my friend and executive producer, Frances Lawrence, who had read about her and specifically about the love triangle with Diane and Henri years before. And then he sent me the book because it had become available again. And I read the book. And first of all, the incredible breadth of her life seemed for television. You couldn't tell that story in a feature film. But also, I thought that I didn't, I hadn't realized her pivotal role in European history. And I also hadn't realized how iconoclastic she is, how important she is in culture. The people who've never heard of her have heard of the magic mirror and the poison apple, all of these things were attributed to her. But most of all, she struck me as such a modern character. Somebody who was a master of spin, somebody who wasn't particularly someone who was a survivalist above all. And I became, it's odd to say because she has such a bad reputation, I became very fond of her throughout the process. The challenge and also the pleasure. I think that she is a highly complicated, multifaceted character. So that was the challenge was, she's she's highly complicated. I wanted her to be addressing a modern audience. I wanted this idea, a classic anti-hero. I couldn't think of a female anti-hero. I'm sure they exist, but I couldn't think of one. And I wanted her to make her case because I think it's these villains from history, they survived. And often their villainy, their villainy is the cost of survival. So I wanted her to own all of her villainy, but at the same time to expose what I think defined Catherine, which was the fact that she wasn't loved. She wasn't loved by her parents, and she wasn't loved by the man she fell for and had been arranged to. And I think that's the defining characteristic, and that's timeless. That's so modern. But so in order to try to do both of those things at the same time, while making the history, this was another challenge, while making the history comprehensible to a modern audience. I wanted people to enjoy the show who know nothing about history. And if you want to watch the entire show and still know nothing about history, you can. You can just enjoy it on a human level. But at the same time, for it to be there, because the other, I think, a pitfall of doing a period show in very modern tone is you can make it seem that there are no stakes. You can make it, you have to take seriously what was serious to these people. And so that's the balance to walk. Absolutely. I mean, as I said, I wanted to do a villain from history making a case. So people break, we've broken the fourth wall in drama since the ancient Greeks, Shakespeare. It's not a new device. But what I thought it would be unique to have the person who's addressing the camera, that we know who she's talking to. She's talking to a specific person, and she's trying to argue a point. She's trying to explain her actions. We find out over time she's trying to explain her actions to a particular end in order to get something out of Rahima, because the manipulation never ends. In terms of the breadth of the time and the decision to use two actors, I don't think you can tell Catherine's story without dramatizing how young she was when she was plucked out of the monastery or the nunnery and sent to France and then had to consummate her wedding in front of an audience. I mean, it's every teenager's worst nightmare, right? But at the same time, you can't tell the Catherine story without addressing how long she reigned and also her relationship with her children, which become very, very important. Because I think, like a lot of anti-heroes, she would say, like Walter White or Michael Corleone, I've done everything for the children. And we need to find out if that's true or not. And so thinking about those, the practical solution was to do two actors. So for the first three episodes, Liv Hill plays a young Catherine, a wonderful actor. But I wanted to make sure Samantha was in those episodes. And I love this idea of having the direct address to the camera in Liv's voice, but a voiceover in Samantha's voice, because I think that subconsciously it alerts the audience to the idea that these are memories and they can be altered on purpose or not, accidentally. And I think that kind of soup of memory of different voices leads to the sense an audience can, I hope, leads to a sense that the audience could be manipulated by this person. And then in episode 4, when Samantha takes over the role from Liv, it's not a jolt. You're familiar with her, you know her voice, you know her face. It feels natural, as opposed, sometimes for me, it doesn't work when they suddenly change an actor in the middle, you've never seen them before. So it was a solution to some practical problems. Of course, the history only has the posh people in it, right? It only has the royals, only has the nobles. Occasionally in Leona's book, she would describe somebody specific, a tailor who was killed by King Henry, and he's in the show. And I was always fascinated by those people who were just trying to live their lives in this world that was utterly unfair. And so there's a whole side of the show which are invented characters. All of her, with the exception of Sebastio, her dressmaker, everybody was invented who she gathered around her. And Rahima is another one of those characters. I mean, you know, I wanted Rahima to be another survivor. I wanted Catherine to recognize in Rahima somebody like herself. And even though Rahima would deny it at first and try to be a good servant, you begin to realize Catherine is right about her. And in the same way, this cast is multinational. There's Dutch, English, Australian, American. It's also multiracial. And it's not simply race colorblind casting. It's also these histories have been whitewashed. These courts were much more ethnically diverse than we realize, and that class was really much more important than race. So the idea, and I also wanted for Rahima, I wanted Catherine to address somebody who might say these period shows had nothing to say to me, and to a very modern character. Say, look, I'm just trying to get something to eat. I'm just trying to get out of here alive. And then to slowly learn, no, this is relevant to me. So that was the construction of the character. And Seni is a wonderful actor. And over time, throughout the series, you begin to realize she has her own agenda and is just as complicated a character as anybody else. She survived so much at such a young age. At age 11, she was hiding from kidnappers and cutting off her hair and dressing up as a nun and negotiating this travel from Italy to France, which at the time would have been a vast distance and certainly a cultural distance. She outlived 4 or 5 kings. She negotiated with the Holy Roman Emperor, and later, Ivan the Terrible, and she rubbed shoulders against these towers of history and more than held her own. I think probably outplayed a lot of them. But what really moved me about her was, I think the defining feature of her life was heartbreak. And I think she fell in love with this inadequate guy who she was promised to, like, the kind of star football player who wasn't as smart as her. And his rejection of her was what defined the rest of her life. And I found that really moving. So that was a big surprise.